Yeah, that was exquisite. Thank you. Thank you for showing the little video about our work at Network. Because what I have to say is, I'm so honored by this award, but I'm only the name tag for a huge body of folks that have made this possible, many of whom are in this room. Since I have heard, oh, I signed the bus. I was with you on the bus, or remember when. And what I really want to acknowledge is that this moment is a moment of deeper community. And it's really important that we not make the mistake of thinking that it's just an individual. Because that, I think, leads us into the trap of this time, which is all about individualism, which in my view is an unpatriotic lie, said she in a political package. The other day I was giving a talk, and it was in a kind of a contentious setting, which is my favorite place to be. You might be surprised to hear. But what happened was this guy said to me, you know, in the question and answer period, it was like, well, you're just a socialist. Well, I loved it. It was so much fun. It was great. And the Holy Spirit was alive and well and making mischief in my ever nimble brain. And I said, isn't that the silliest thing you've ever heard? And I laughed. And I said, no. I'm a constitutionalist. We the people. Do you want to join me? Come, be patriotic. Be a constitutionalist. And he was like, oh. What's that? So in reflecting for this moment, I came to realize that what we are called to in this moment is to be a disruptor of the status quo. And isn't that what Clare was? She disrupted the status quo because she was anchored in the deeper truth of a God alive in our midst who stays ever present. We are not left alone, and she knew that in the very fiber of her being. She worked against income and wealth disparity. She worked against the corruption in the church. She worked to create another way of life for women other than the monastic model. Now, one of the things I have to add is my community is dedicated, it follows a Benedictine spirit, so I would never want to think that the Benedictines, where she first went, tried to limit her light. But what I do know is that the freeing of the light, as well as the support for her own contemplative reflection, I think deepened her and moved her, at least as I read. And that she stubbornly held on with good feminine leadership to her very deathbed, as Jan said, to insist on the approval of her rule. She was the first woman to write a rule for other women. Well, that's been a few centuries. We still have a long way to go. At least it was good news in that moment. Good news that we hold on to. But what I want to do is talk a little bit about the disrupting element of that women's leadership that is needed now. Because I think we are all called to that. And ironically, I learned about it in the Vatican. I lead a very odd life, you know. So I often joke and say, lead a quiet life, join the convent. That's my recommendation. But a couple of years ago, I got invited to Rome to give a talk. And this group, Voices of Faith, was created by a woman from Liechtenstein. I never really thought anybody lived in Liechtenstein, but she does. And her family grew up there, and but her family has been, for generations, has been supporting the Vatican. She grew up in the Vatican. She knows the Vatican kind of the way I know DC, you know, where the underground tunnels are, those kinds of things. But she has created this group, Voices of Faith, you might be interested in. And every year they have this gathering of women to speak in the Vatican. I thought the Swiss Guard wasn't going to let me in, but we went and had this opportunity for a gathering there, and many of the women religious in Rome came to the talk, and other folks came. It was very moving. But a woman that was on the panel with me, Scylla Elworthy, is a Quaker woman, and she has worked in anti-nuclear work. But she has also studied the impact of getting women in leadership in the anti-nuclear work. And now I, as a peace activist, never thought it was a good idea to have women in the military and all this. And she said, oh no, on the contrary. It was really important to have feminine intelligence in the midst of these decision makers, to open other closed minds. And she has done this really longitudinal study about the impact of getting feminine intelligence into decision making, both at the corporate level and at the military level. One of the stories she told us about was that she was having a big nuclear conference with all the deciders about nuclear weapons. She had Russians and British and French and all of the nuclear powers present. And she, as a good Quaker, had recruited a bunch of her friends that did contemplative meditation. And so she had all of these negotiators up in the room above, and she had all the meditators down in the room below. And so the meditators were just spending a lot of energy praying for peace and openness, or whatever, you know, just that meditative moment, for hours. And finally, a Russian says to her at the lunch break, or when they were about to break for lunch, he said, "What is going on?" She goes, "What do you mean, what's going on?" "What is going on? There's something's coming from down below." She was like, "Oh my glory." And so what she said, "Oh, well, we just have some people meditating." Meditating? What is this meditating? What is this? Is this some, you know, a computer that you're talking about? She said, no, come. So she took them all downstairs, and they met the people who were doing the meditating. And she said it transformed the conversation, because they were no longer caught in the sound bites of their various positions, but rather they were then in the engagement of a deep sense of a deeper power, a deeper story, a deeper truth. Even if they weren't people of faith, they were, the fact that it was the Russian guy was so surprising that he was sensitive to this. I probably wouldn't have noticed, but what she learned at that moment, and then what she has learned in her studies, is that there are 5 characteristics that she believes our world is hungry for, that she calls feminine intelligence. And so my intelligent friends, and the bold men in the room, it includes you too, because this isn't just about the gender issue, it's about letting our minds open up to other ways of thinking. So these 5 characteristics I wanted to speak briefly about, because I think in this chaotic time, we need another way. You might have noticed the old ways are not working too well. Iowa is ground zero. I feel so sorry for you every 4 years, but I understand some of you kind of enjoy it. But I think we need some other ways of approaching this. So I'm beginning to think that at the conventions, the political conventions, maybe we could get some meditators under the General Assembly floors. Wouldn't that be kind of cool? Right? But anyway, apart from that, these are 5 characteristics that we're working on at Network to shift the political, and I would invite you to join us in it. The first, she says, is that a feminine intelligence is inclusive. that the feminine is inclined to want to include, to not leave people out, to make sure that we have various perspectives. Now, I will tell you that when I lobbied Paul Ryan, okay, bless me, sisters, my brothers, I have to confess, it's good for the soul, but I miss Paul Ryan. He was so much fun to rag on, but Kevin McCarthy just is not the same. And Mitch McConnell, you won't even go there. So this is polite company. So, but when I would lobby Paul Ryan, he always had this theory, he had a policy, he had a thing, a program that he wanted to promote, and then I'd bring up some folks I met who were going to be hurt by his policy. And he said to me, well, they're not the targets of my program, but they're going to be your victims. We need a politics, a bigger conversation that is inclusive, even of the people we disagree with. Now, that's a challenge because I know from my own beloved family that families are probably the most difficult place to have that inclusion, and maybe we shouldn't try it with the most difficult relatives, but get somebody else, get a friend to do that for you. But I want to tell you what happened is, to me, I often used my brother as the difficult relative and suggested a lending library of difficult relatives and things like that, and I was going to put him in the library. And I ragged on him entirely too much. But what happened a couple of months ago, just before the last bus trip in the fall, is that I did a video that was on some podcast thing, and it kind of went viral, and some of his friends on Facebook kind of went nutty about it. This crazy, wacko commie, rah, rah, rah. And my brother, my sister reported to me, stood up for me. He said, well, she's talking sense right now and what we need, and you ought to pay attention, and I'm standing up for her and her right to say it, as well as the fact that she's my sister. It made me realize that inclusion means including even my brother, because there's a love that's deeper than the politics. And sometimes I've begun to wonder if the politics is divisive just because as a weird way of showing intimacy. Do we dare talk beyond it? If we don't fight, do we have anything to say? So now I'm trying to be more prepared for a broader conversation. But that the key that we need in today's politics, and that I think Clare would advocate, is inclusion, listening, inclusion of the different voices. The second feminine intelligence is once you've included, then you gotta listen. This is really hard for those of us that have very strong opinions and watch entirely too much MSNBC. Because what happens is the temptation is just to spout off, because if you've just been watching, there's nobody to help you dilute or to engage or figure out where it fits. I've come to learn that listening is probably the most important political action we can do. Listening to stories that are not our own. Yesterday, we got to do what we did around the country. We did our 8th rural roundtable. Because we've been out around the country because we know we don't know the stories of rural America. And we're trying to listen to understand. Where can you listen? Where can you invite stories that you might not hear otherwise? So inclusion and then listening. Because you can't invite people in just to hear your point of view. That often happens. Have you noticed that? Or I just can hardly wait to get in my point. It's a discipline. It's a spiritual discipline to listen. And I think it's part of the contemplative practice. The third characteristic of feminine intelligence is to see that things are interconnected. Interconnected. There's a connection between the fact that your river is so high again And there's been flooding in a variety of places, and then yesterday there was untold inches of rain in New Orleans, and there was drought in other parts of our globe. These are connected, and feminine intelligence is more likely to see those connections. Politicians aren't too likely to see it unless we point it out to them. Because what happens when you see interconnections is that you have a tendency to think, oh my God, it's so complicated. We can't do anything. All right, here's the response to that. But what interconnection means is if you take action in one place, it's gonna affect a whole bunch of other things. So do something and get started. Isn't that kind of cool? It's sort of like being called a socialist. I can hardly wait for somebody to say that to me. Give them that answer, or listen to what they're saying. I know, I just wait to listen. But to lift up the interconnection reality. The fourth characteristic of this feminine intelligence is compassion. And by that, Scylla means empathy that moves to action. Empathy that moves to action. And I think that is probably the key that is missing in the political discourse. The political discourse is so much about harsh, negative ads, trying to take the other person down, being, confrontational engagement, and how can you attack, and who got it, and then the way it's reported. Doesn't it set your hair on fire sometimes? And it's just, ugh. Compassion means where we see everybody has something to offer. And I have a place to move, to act, to care, to engage. Compassion, the heart of compassion, is all about breaking open the challenging time and then moving, not being content, knowing that we're a part of this. We can make a difference. And then the final piece is that feminine intelligence knows regeneration. We know that when something dies, it's not the end of the story. And I'd like to use the example of the compost pit that I saw out at the Clinton Franciscan place. I was there, and I forget who it was. One of you was putting various peelings and coffee grounds and all this, and commented on these very vibrant green plants, one of which sort of looked like a bean plant, and another one looked like a tomato plant, and all this stuff coming out of the compost pit. Isn't that like politics right now? There can be good news in the midst of the compost. If we keep nourishing, engaging, knowing that it's not the end of the story. And this is where, for me, I believe Clare is at the heart of being a sign for it, because of her commitment to the contemplative story, that her contemplative practice let her know that God, Christ, was alive and a light, that we were not left orphans, that we are connected at every moment, that the way I say it is that the divine creates us at every moment. We are the hum of the divine. And if we remember that, then we know we are empowered together to make a difference. So, thank you for the Clare Award. I'm humbled by it. But what it means is that we all receive it. We all are light. Back home, all the folks from Network, and I need to do the ad, be sure to pick stuff up about Network. They'll shoot me if I didn't do that one right. This is why you need a community, because not everybody has the same gifts, and I'm very bad at my advertisements, so But what I've come to see is that this contemplative moment requires us to both weep and include, to speak and to listen, to be present in a way that allows the interconnections to bubble up, to hold a compassionate heart for all of those, even the ones I want to leave out. And finally, to know that we're not the end of the story, that regeneration happens, that the light continues beyond us, that we are the gifts to the next generation. So, to close this, I want to close with a poem that I wrote. It's in my book's over there too. I'm supposed to advertise that. But they're small for you. But I want to close with this poem, Compassion's Path. And it's one I wrote in Iraq, where I was with Kathy Thornton, who's here. Coming back, we got in a sandstorm. We were driving from Baghdad to Amman in a taxi. It was so weird. There were so many stories. That's a whole other thing, talking about it. It was December of 2002. But in that sandstorm, what we had to do was keep going, because otherwise we were going to get run into on this highway. Couldn't see anything. You smelled it. It turned light brown, dark brown, light brown, dark brown. You'd think it was going to be over. And then finally, we came to this like small little band of rain. And all of a sudden, we were out in crystal clear desert, and we could look back and see the sandstorm. And then later, I heard that camels in the desert run towards sandstorms because they know the trailing edge has rain, and they're looking for water. Little known facts from the Mississippi, where you got plenty of water. But I want to close with this, because I think it speaks to the challenge of our time and what we're called to do, and what Clare did in her time. And it goes like this. It's Compassion's Path. We walk a sandstorm of impotence, isolated dread, the demons of our day. We walk a sandstorm of half-truths, lies of ochre, beige, tan, sepia confusion, pelted, buffeted by winds of war. We walk a sandstorm of drifting elusive truth, wandering ways, and blind following. We walk a sandstorm eroded by demanding doubt, overwhelmed by the horror swirling round, invading lungs and lives. We walk a sandstorm of promised grief, aching temptation to hunker down and hide until a more propitious time. But in this time of alluring weakness, in this time of fearful groaning, cold, blind logic, anger rising, remember the clear-eyed anchor of our resolve. Remember the eyes of Mayada, Sarah, Rita, Hassan, Abdullah, Makbula, and many more. We may be blinded in the outward journey, but remember this inner core. May the eyes of families, terrors of family, set fire to our impotence, stoke our resolve, melt the cold stone of our hearts to yield to tears. For like rain, tears shed clear the air. Like rain, tears shed reveal the path. So let us weep. Let us embody healing tears. Let us be copious tears to settle our country's storm. Thank you very much.